Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Five Coaching Skills Every Leader Should Master, brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Kelsey Campbell, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Campus Engagement in the Alumni Engagement Office, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. We will give everyone a minute or so to log on, and in the meantime, I want to provide you all with some details about today's webinar. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes, and there will be an opportunity for a Q&A towards the end of the presentation. Should you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them via the chat function. This webinar will be recorded, and we will add it to the webinar in our Alumni Association website, and we will also email you the direct link in upcoming days. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Hallie Crawford. Hallie has been a certified career coach, speaker, author, and national career expert since 2002. Her company, Create Your Career Path, is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. She is regularly featured in Forbes, CNN, Money Magazine, and the WSJ. She holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from Vanderbilt University and the University of Illinois. With over 2,500 success stories, her team of coaches and resume writers help professionals find jobs that make them want to jump out of bed in the morning and go to work. With that, I'll turn it over to Hallie.
Thanks, Kelsey. Really appreciate it. And I think that's a tongue twister, and we should make people say Alumni Association 3 times in a row because it's hard. Really appreciate the intro, and thank you all for being here today. We greatly appreciate your time, and we're going to be talking today about coaching skills that we feel are very important for leaders to master. There will be 5 of them plus some other tips kind of as we go. And so that you know, the advice that we're going to give you today really goes across the board, in my opinion, regardless of whether you're actually in a leadership or management position, I should say, or if you're more so looking to just be a better leader in your professional life, within your teams, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm thrilled to be here. This is one of my favorite topics because we love talking with our coaching clients about the coaching skills that we use with them. And what's really cool too is they will often tell us like, oh, I've been using some of these tools, that we talk about during our sessions, and they find them to be incredibly helpful. So just a quick note. So as Kelsey said, I've been coaching since 2002. I'm a Vandy grad, and I'll give you the date, even though that ages me. It's 1995. And have been a certified career coach since 2002. The advice that we're going to give you all today, though, is advice that there's going to be a lot of tips and advice, and we try to make this as practical and tangible and kind of down to earth as possible. And because, though, we're going to give you a lot of tips and advice, please think about things this way. Pick and choose kind of what makes the most sense for you and your situation and what your goals are. As a reminder, you'll get the recording and we will give you an opportunity, and I'll go ahead and move to our agenda slide. You can also get the slides from us, but I don't want people to walk away overwhelmed. I want you to be able to say, okay, here are the 2 action steps that I need to take for my situation that make the most sense for me in the next week or so. And then know that you can come back to the rest later. So really quickly, what we're going to talk about today with our agenda is why coaching and why we feel coaching skills are actually really helpful for leaders to be more effective versus, other types of skills. Obviously, other types of skills are great, but these certain ones that we're going to talk with you about can really help you be a more effective leader. We'll talk about those skills and go into detail, giving you some examples, et cetera. And then we will have time for Q&A at the end. So just as a quick reminder, there will be time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to put those in the chat box. But please, if you have questions along the way, comments that you want to make, things that you want to suggest, or resources, please feel free also to put those in anytime, because I love interaction with these. I'm happy to stop and pause and answer something or, make a comment, etc. So hold on to this email address if you'd like the slides, and go ahead and put questions in anytime as we progress. So here's why, I don't know, I feel like obviously leadership has been an important tool or skill throughout, history, so to speak. But I feel like these days, the importance of really effective leadership is just that much more critical because with all of the changes during and post COVID, and now with AI and some people still working remotely sometimes or hybrid model or whatever it is. And even outside of that, we have found that employees are they're wanting more engagement from their work. They're wanting more of a sense of fulfillment. They want greater flexibility and they want to feel more connected and to have more like meaning from their jobs. That's what we hear from people on a pretty consistent basis and have for the past several years, more so than others. And it's really important for us as leaders to understand that and try to provide it to them as much as possible and use some of these other coaching skills. So, for example, we're empathizing with our employees a little bit more. We are listening to them better, et cetera. Now, this doesn't mean that we're always going with what every employee says and all of that. And we'll talk about that more as we progress. But just this idea of leadership and leading, whether your team is in person or remote, et cetera, there's just a lot that has happened in the past several years that has impacted what we need to pay attention to people and with our employees. It's more important than ever to talk to them about, are they leveraging their strengths? Are they enjoying their work? What are they passionate about? What are their values, et cetera? Okay. So we'd love to launch our first poll here. And I'm really curious why each person today is interested in developing coaching skills. Because as I said before, all of these should kind of go across the board, regardless of what your situation is. But just really curious to see kind of where things fall, whether you're a new leader, you're taking on more senior leadership roles or want to do so. And in some cases, we know that people are managing difficult situations, and that could be part of why you're here as well. And the advice we'll give you today can help with those touchy situations too, just by the way. And it could be other, and that's fine too. Oh, and by the way, as you're completing the poll, if you want to put what your reason is, if it falls under other, we'd love to see that in the chat box as well. All right, awesome. Okay, so thank you all for participating in this. So interestingly, we've got the two middle ones kind of neck and neck. So more senior leadership roles. That's awesome. That's great. And I will pay attention to and make sure that we go into a little bit more detail about managing difficult relationships as well. Please know, like I said a moment ago, so thanks for sharing this. As I said a moment ago, this should go across the board. But as we progress, if some of the advice needs to kind of be tailored to what your situation is a little bit more, ask a question, make a comment. Happy to do that. And we've got one person who's sharing teaching leadership classes and career skills and mentoring college students. That's awesome. Very cool. All right, so let's talk first about coaching and how at least we define it and how I was trained as a coach. So, in an ideal world, if you look at this next slide, coaching in its purest form, and I say that because my team actually kind of does a hybrid of coaching and consulting. But in its purest form, when I was certified as a coach, we were taught, so to speak, and trained to not tell people what to do, but instead get better and build those muscles of helping someone figure out their answers or the right answer on their own, showing someone a different perspective or a different way of addressing a problem. In some cases, it would be giving feedback or explaining something a little bit more or encouraging and being empathetic. So, in its purest form, that is how coaching is defined and how we see it. Now, we know as leaders, this is one tool in your toolbox. You have to give instructions plenty of times. You have to be decisive, make decisions, etc. So just please be clear about like what we're looking to do here today is that developing these types of skills can help you deepen your relationships with people, deal with those difficult situations better, understand where your employees are coming from to then be able to lead them better, et cetera. So in an ideal world, on the left-hand side, coaching is really helping someone, sorry, learn different things in order to improve their performance or achieve their goals, whatever that goal is. What coaching is and what it is not, and this is helpful to think about, is on this next slide. It's a method or a way or tools to provide guidance to people. Again, not telling them just what to do. And the cool thing, though, about coaching, when it's used at the right time and in an appropriate time, et cetera, and in the right way, it empowers other people to find their own answers. And we all know how much more effective, or how we'll remember something that we've learned on our own more so than if someone just told us how to do something. And this is why it can be so impactful. Coaching is not therapy, so we are not therapists, but what we do with our clients is we tell them that we want to hear about their emotions, frustrations, anything else that's going on. Feelings may come up during the course of being a leader. Understandably, we're all human. And it doesn't mean that you can't just, you can't just be robotic and ignore that part of it. But what we tell people is we are there to be a sounding board. They can vent. We're there to listen. We may brainstorm ideas with them. And we have tools to help them deal with emotional intelligence and self-management. And then if there is something deeper going on, of course, like a therapist may need to come in to help them with a certain situation. And it's not, like we said before, it's not just telling people what to do. It's much deeper than that in a good way. So, the 5 skills that we want to talk about today are foundational skills for a coaching relationship. And like we said, leaders to become more like coaches in certain situations and scenarios can really help them be more effective in a lot of different ways. So, we're going to talk about designing your relationships with people more effectively up front, or if not up front, like in a more kind of structured way. 3 levels of listening, this idea of powerful questions, recognizing other people's strengths, and how to be thinking about and developing your unique leadership strengths, knowing that we can't be a perfect leader in all areas. So, kind of what is your brand as a leader? All right, so let's talk about this first one. And here's the idea, okay, is as much as you can as a leader, even if those relationships have already been ongoing for years, the more you can structure them effectively and have even agreements about how you work together more effectively, the better off they're going to be. And so what we're looking at here is on the right-hand side of this slide. If you can get better about structuring your relationships, conversations, and meetings, and having some of these agreements either in advance or just starting to implement them right now, that's fine too. This can help set the stage for a more effective working relationship. And I'll use us just as a very quick example. So when we start a coaching relationship with a client, which I get is different than what your situation is, but we actually have something in writing that's an agreement about here's what we're agreeing to. You are agreeing that we are here to give you feedback, input, guidance, etc. We're not always going to know the exact right answer, though. You have to be responsible for doing the homework and these other things too. So we have an agreement up front that we want to be honest and direct with each other. And here's how we would like to do that. And we'll adjust it based on each client as needed. So, whether you have an agreement that's formal in writing, which in some cases teams will have, which I think is a great idea, they'll have a team charter that you've got something that's at least agreed upon. And basically, you're talking about how you work together, not just running into the office, getting your work done and leaving at 5 or whatever it is, but actually like not just doing the work, but talking about how you work. And some of the things that you could discuss, whether it's in a one-time conversation or longer term, is whether your conversations need to be confidential or not at that moment or another time. We think it's a great idea for you to explain what your style is, your strengths and desires as a leader are using a quick example. So we had a woman who was moving from a very large corporation into a smaller organization. It was a bump up for her in terms of leadership. And she realized at her old job, though, that because she wasn't this under crisis, she was very cool and calm and collected. That people had started to get the sense from her that maybe she didn't care as much about the priorities just because she wasn't running around with her hair on fire. That was one of the things that she explained up front in her new job is just want you to know, like, these are some of my strengths, etc. And I tend to be that kind of person that even in a crisis, I'm pretty calm and collected. Just want you to know that. Doesn't mean I don't care. It's just kind of, it's like when crisis sets in, I tend to actually get calmer. So just explaining how you're coming across or why you are can be so incredibly helpful versus just assuming that everyone's going to understand why you communicate the way you do, etc. Giving that background can be helpful. A third thing as a leader is being vulnerable or open when it's appropriate to do so. We worked with a CEO who was also the owner of his company years ago. He was ex-military, and a few years into founding his organization, he learned from someone that he was pretty intimidating and everyone was kind of afraid of him. So over time in meetings with large groups, he would start to share stories of past mistakes that he had made in his career, just to be a little bit more vulnerable and open. And it started to change the culture of his organization over time. It was really cool. In some cases, if you look at the next bullet point, it's a good idea, not just for your meetings with people, one-on-one or otherwise, to just say, these are the tasks that we have to accomplish, but have some soft goals in some cases for the conversation or meeting. Like, I'd like to understand this person a little bit better and maybe where they're coming from, or I'd like to motivate this person a little bit more. So what are the soft goals that you want to establish for your conversations and meetings? Add those to the agenda. They may not be on the piece of paper, but in the back of your mind. And then finally, and we'll talk about this more, but that is this idea of checking in about how someone's feeling about something, if they're motivated about it, how they feel about their job. Finding out about those things when it's appropriate to do so can be really helpful to better understanding what's going on in the background. And we'll launch the second poll here while we're talking about this. We had a client once who she was really frustrated with her boss. So it was actually kind of the opposite of what we're talking about in terms of the leader. It was the other way around. She was really frustrated with her. And when she started to try to understand where that leader was coming from, what her personal life was like, et cetera, it helped her start to like tone down her frustration a little bit more and be a little bit calmer when she was like, oh, okay, this person may not be totally happy in all areas of their life. And maybe in some cases, they're bringing that into the office. Doesn't mean it's okay, but it happens sometimes. So if we could do our second poll here, that would be great, because I don't know if I can. Yeah, okay, awesome, perfect. So what makes you be willing, or what makes you willing to be open with someone? Because what we want you to think about here is, as a leader, are any of these things that you may want to incorporate a little bit more into your leadership style? Do you need to work on building that trust? Do you need to get a little bit better about building that empathy muscle? Or, I need to be vulnerable and open. So when from your perspective, I guess I should say, for your situation, is what makes you be willing to be open with someone? Because if you start to employ that with the other people that are on your team, that can help develop that sense of safety and having direct feedback and communication, et cetera, and help improve your relationship. Okay, sorry, I had something in my throat. Okay, perfect timing. So let's see what we've got. Trust is the biggest one. Okay, that's huge. So that all of the tools that we're going to be talking about today will help build all of these, but that foundation of trust is huge. Empathy, big one, and then them being open with me, 29% too. Thanks for sharing this, everybody. Really appreciate that. So with the touchy situations, like we talked about in our first poll, couple things that we would recommend that you do if you need to talk with someone about something that's difficult, give them difficult feedback, or if this person has been more difficult, combative, etc., is it's a great idea on a consistent basis with one-on-one with people, but also with your teams to just kind of gut check the energy, like what's going on with people, how do they seem to be feeling, are we all as a team just not that motivated or whatever, and what do we need to do about that as a leader if we can. For touchy situations, take a look at this next slide here. It's a good idea to tell them in advance that you need to talk about something touchy and ask permission to do so. So I really need to talk with you about something that could be difficult to hear, Miriam, or whatever their name is, and ask permission. Is this an okay time to do that? Please know that I want to talk with you about this because I want to improve our working relationship, or I want to support your growth and development. So asking permission, letting them know that you're coming from a positive place can go miles in making things smoother. Is it going to make it perfect? Depends on the situation, not necessarily, but it will help kind of smooth the runway. And then it's a really good idea to ask them questions in addition to saying, these are the things I wanted to discuss. I have some concerns about ABC. Does that make sense to you? And what are your feelings about this? You need to give them some airtime too. Because what if they saw things in a completely different way and you actually understood where they were coming from? So make sure that along the way, when you're having these kinds of conversations, it's not just telling them one-way street. It's a two-way street, and you're asking them deeper questions to at least try to understand where they're coming from. As we said earlier, this does not mean you have to agree with them, but the fact that you even ask questions shows good listening, helps develop that trust, and helps develop that empathy. Let's look at number 2, and this goes into our listening tip. So there's 3 levels of listening in coaching. Level 1 is internal listening. This is our own internal voice, which we need to listen to. I'm hungry. This meeting is boring. Why are we having another meeting? All that kind of stuff, right? But also, what you need to attend to as a leader is if you're formulating an opinion or a judgment about another person or what's going on in a situation. And it doesn't mean that you have to hold back on that, but you just want to be aware of it because it will come out in your conversation with them, whether you intend for it to or not. So just be careful of that and withhold it if it's appropriate to do so at the beginning of the conversation and then bring it out later or whatever it is. Level 1 listening is important, but we want leaders to be at levels 2 and 3. Level 2 is focused on the other person. You're really listening to their words, but you're also paying attention to the nonverbals and the nuances in the conversation. Do they keep repeating the same thing over and over? And you need to call that out for a second because you're like, okay, you keep saying this. So should I be worried about ABC? And then level 3 is global listening. And this is kind of what we talked about earlier with that intuition. It's paying attention to, if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, the energy between the two of you or within the team, how it's changing. What are the emotions there? Is there a mood or a tone? And we need to shift the dialogue or the tone of the conversation somehow using the tools that we're talking about today. The way to get better at this global listening, because I know we're all busy, so it feels like I don't have time to do this stuff, right? You don't have to spend a ton of time doing these things. It's about using the time that you have wisely and better than maybe you do already. The way to get into this global listening is slow yourself down. Don't step over things that might be red flags that they're saying to you. You even talk a little bit slower so that you're really paying attention to what's really going on. Okay. And in some cases, and let's go ahead and launch our first poll here, or our third poll. Hello. Do you currently employ effective listening skills based on what we're talking about today, the 1, 2, and 3, especially number 3? In some cases, it may be a better idea to ask the person a question versus give them advice to find out, do they know the right answer? What do they think about this? Do they have a different answer that might be better or a possible solution? Again, doesn't mean you have to go with it, but you're trying to create this two-way communication and have it be more effective. With global listening, our instinct, I think, is to rush through things, get things done, and all of that. And we all know when we'll say like something blows up later, we'll be like, I had a feeling this was coming. What we want you to do is listen to that feeling at the time so that you can avoid it in the long run or manage it. So we'll give you a moment to complete these. Okay, so I'm actually happy with that 41% feel like they do. That's awesome because I know a lot of people are like, yeah, I've heard about active listening, a ton. I already get what that is. So please know that the fact that you do, that's awesome. And the people that don't, you're not alone. Like this is hard. It's even hard for us as coaches. So please know it's a muscle that you can develop over time. You can practice with friends and family members right now just to get a little bit better at it and bring those skills into the workplace. Let's talk next about tip number 3 or coaching skill number 3. And this is the idea on the left-hand side of the slide of guiding, not telling people what to do when you can, when it's appropriate to do so. And basically, this idea of powerful questions sums up this piece of advice or coaching skill. Powerful questions are leveraging your strength of curiosity. They are open-ended, they're childlike almost, and there's no judgment in them. And the key about powerful questions, which is really cool, is it forces the other person that you're asking the question of to think about something maybe in a different way, or just think about it or take ownership of it more so than they would otherwise if you just asked a yes or no question. So the main key point about powerful questions is in the middle of the slide. They're open-ended. The other person can't answer yes or no. And you'll see some examples here. So one, how can we work together more effectively? What's another choice you can make, etc. The other thing that I like about powerful questions is that not only does it force them to think about something, maybe take ownership of it, and even more so empowers them to figure out their own answers or gives you a much deeper perspective of what's going on with this person. In some cases, it forces or assumes a positive outcome. So if you take a look at the top example here on the slide, how can we work together more effectively? There's no room for, no, it's not going to happen. It's how can we do this? Let's make it happen. Okay. Now, I get that in some cases you're at a stopgap and maybe the person that you're working with who's difficult is just not playing ball. And sometimes we do need to bring in our supervisor or HR or something like that. Totally understand that. I'm not saying this is going to make everything perfect all the time, but what I do know is that it will make a difference. And even if that difficult person continues to be a difficult, let's say for a little while longer, the fact that you started to ask them questions, that has an impact on that other person, even if they never admit it. So just know that starting to implement this idea of curiosity and the tools that we're talking about more will change the tone and kind of way your relationship is playing out. And as a leader, to be able to set this tone for your teams can be just so effective and helpful. Now, when we look at curiosity, let's talk about this just for another second here. On the left-hand side, remember, it's not about offering judgment or opinion, at least in that moment. You can do that later on, but in the moment, you're just playing in the sandbox with options, okay? You want to just tell yourself that so you can hold yourself back for a minute and really stay present with them. Offer your opinion, tell them what needs to happen when it's appropriate, totally fine. But it's a good idea and can be helpful to at least make an effort to understand their perspective overall and do that first before launching in with yours. The person, if you ask them questions up front first and allow them to explain things, give their opinion, their thoughts, etc., they're going to be more likely to allow you to do the same thing. And it'll feel less like you're a bull in a china shop coming across if you do it that way too. Let's talk next about this model. This is related to this idea of curiosity, but honestly, it goes kind of across the board with what we talked about earlier. It's building that sense of trust. This is a model from the Gallup organization, which is the organization that owns the StrengthsFinder assessment, but also the Gallup poll. And this is what they assert are the 4 needs of followers. I don't like the term followers as much, but basically what they mean by followers is any employee of any organization, including the CEO or any even volunteer organization. So the point here is that we all have needs as employees. And as a leader, if you can start to try to understand how you can build these 4 things more so within your team with another person, things are going to go better and be more effective. Now, it's not solely your job to prop someone up with all of these, but this is part of what you want to address. If you are having a breakdown or difficulty with someone else, if you can figure out which one of these is missing in your relationship with them, you can start to work on that too. So one of our clients a while back worked for a large health care consulting organization. And it was so interesting. She's like, I took the model, I wrote about it for a few minutes, and I realized I can tell everything that's going wrong within our company or why it's going wrong. It gave her those answers. So let's look at this for just a minute. So top left is trust, like we've said. So being honest as you can be as a leader. I know we have to hold some things back, and providing respect to your employees and being, standing in integrity with what you say you will do, being honest and direct with them, with feedback in the right way, etc., can help build that sense of trust. And remember, we talked earlier about when you share with them and when you're vulnerable, sometimes that can help too. Employees all want a sense of stability, that they have some sense of job security. We know nothing's perfect, but that they've got the support that they need from you, that they've got like peace in their work life in the sense of, I've got the tools I need to be effective. My boss has my back, those types of things. Stability is a really key piece as well. Then there's compassion and hope. Compassion is we've got some sense of camaraderie. I enjoy my work. I enjoy my coworkers, at least the majority of the time. Again, nothing's going to be perfect here, but there's some sense of my boss cares about me as a person, not just like a number and an employee. And then finally, we all want to have this sense of like hope, like we believe in our leadership. We have faith that they know what they're doing and there's guidance, like we know what our direction is and why we're doing what we're doing. So sometimes providing more context to people as a leader about why you're working on something or how something needs to happen can actually motivate them, but give them this sense of hope a little bit more too. So it's a great idea. Get the slides. I'll put this into the chat, the email address again, but think about what you can do if you print this out on your desk, for example, just to remind yourself of like, okay, how do I need to infuse more of this into my meetings, etc. That can be incredibly helpful. All right. And then just FYI, Kelsey, maybe if you can check into this for a second. With the chat as an admin item, it looks like if people are going to put questions in, for some reason, I can only write back to you guys. And so I just want to be sure that when we do get to Q&A, that people will be able to see my answers. So either maybe there's a setting there or we can do the Q&A box. Totally fine. If you could check that out for me, it'd be great. All right. So if you feel like you need any other help with any of this, we always offer a free consult. It's a chance to learn more about our services to see if it's the right fit for you. And we always give a discount for Vandy alum. So please let me know when you schedule the consult or when you're talking with me that you heard about us on the Vanderbilt webinar. You can schedule that by using the same email address. It's in the chat box now too, to get the slides too. Happy to talk with you. Let's talk about tips 4 and 5. And then in another 10 minutes, give or take, we'll start to look at Q&A. But please, if you've got questions or comments about what we've said so far, go ahead and put them in there. We'd love to hear from you. So tip number 4 as a leader is it's a really good idea. And I think a lot of leaders don't do this as well as they could. And I get it, we're busy, So it's like, okay, I don't have time to really think necessarily about that deeply about each of my employees' strengths. But it's a really critical thing to do, to not just understand and recognize their strengths in terms of giving them kudos, but like know what they are so that you're assigning them the right tasks, so that they're in the right place on the team, so that they are ideally leveraging their strengths on a more regular basis in their job. Because number one, if employees aren't using their strengths, they're not going to be as successful. And number two, they're actually not going to be fulfilled and they're going to leave. So here's another model from the Gallup organization. We tend to like them, so we use several of their models. And the way to just quickly, doesn't have to be that hard, notice and understand better what each of your team members' strengths are is when they seem like they're really, really effective. Like when have they been successful in the past with projects, tasks, working with certain clients, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And what recognition maybe have they gotten for that? Even looking at past performance reviews. Okay, what are the themes here? The second way to recognize other people's strengths, and this would be for your strengths as well, just by the way, as a leader, because we're going to talk about that in a moment, is when you notice that one of your employees actively or like looks forward to a particular task, volunteers for it, or seems to get excited about working on a certain project, you need to notice that. It's a sign they're leveraging a strength in that task. When you notice they're in the flow, they're doing a great job, they're inquisitive, they're really focused, that's the G, another sign. And then when you feel like they're being really authentic and able to be like true to who they are when they're completed with a task, etc., that's another really good sign that they're leveraging a strength. We had a leader once who, after we did a StrengthsFinder workshop with his team, it was so cool. Every time he would meet with each person on his team, because they had taken the StrengthsFinder assessment, she had their strengths at the top of their agenda every time, so that she kind of kept that in the back of her mind when not just they were assigning tasks, but talking about things, so that she was making sure this employee was really playing to their strengths and leveraging them effectively. So tip number 5, and this is our last tip for today, and then we'll start to get into Q&A, is to develop your own unique leadership style. And here's the deal that I want people to get is that leaders are not supposed to and expected to be perfect in every leadership style or area. It's about you understanding where your strengths are, leveraging those effectively, communicating what they are, and in the right way, communicating with your team about where you might need some help. So finding team members that can support you in those gaps. Like, so I am not very detail oriented, and I've got an admin, and one of our coaches is very detail oriented. And I thank goodness for them all the time because they catch things that I don't. Now, one of our other coaches is more like me. And so I leverage her for different purposes. Okay. But the point is, you want to have a varied team with varying strengths and ones that can help support not just your strengths, but also where some of your challenges might be. So when you're thinking about your own leadership style and starting to develop it and communicate it more effectively, it's a good idea to think about all of these things on the left-hand side of this slide, not just what your strengths are, but what your soft skills are too. We would encourage you to consider what your values are, because even if you're not fully aware of it as a leader, whatever your values are, you are communicating those to your team. And you need to keep in mind kind of a part of this empathy that we talked about in listening is to understand that other people might have different values. And that's why you're butting heads. It's not because they're a bad person. Maybe they have bad ideas, but maybe their values are different. And that's where this tug of war is. And if you got those out on the table, it would be like, oh, okay, so how do we, find kind of the common ground here? And then finally, with your unique leadership style, what are some of your personality traits and strengths that help you kind of drill down more into what those are. So we do a Strengths Finder coaching session with people where you get the Strengths Finder assessment, but we go through your results with you to help you understand how to be more effective as a leader, leveraging your different strengths. So feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to do that with us. It's really effective, especially for leaders. And our final slide, but really important one, is from Development Dimensions International. It's a highly regarded management consulting firm. And you can rate yourself using their wheel of top 10 leadership skills to understand, okay, where are my strengths? Where are the areas that I may need to improve a little bit, and try to leverage some of these coaching skills to kind of bolster what some of those challenges are, but be better overall at leading and managing my team. And what we really like about this model, or I should say, what we would suggest, is the self assessment is great. And keep in mind when you're completing this that some of these areas may not make sense or be applicable to your role. So, for example, leading across generations, if you work in an organization that the generation is kind of the same, like, okay, that may not be relevant. So don't make up that just because it's on this wheel, you suddenly have to be perfect at it. Again, it's about what's relevant to your situation and what your skills and your strengths are. But thinking about all of these in some way, shape, or form can help you start to identify what your brand is a little bit better there. All right. So, oh, and sorry, what I was going to say about the wheel too, I forgot this part, is we find actually the self-assessment is great, but we would encourage you as well to get other people to rank you in these areas, friend or family member, but people who have worked with you before too, someone that you trust, because getting that objective feedback, it sparks a really good conversation about your leadership style, your strengths. They may point out things that you hadn't realized, give you examples of certain things. It can be really cool to have this discussion with someone else from the outside in, because there could be things that you're actually really good at that you don't give yourself credit for. We tend to discount what comes naturally to us. And as leaders, we got to be careful about that because it will help boost our confidence if we understand what those things are. All right. So we would love it if you would take a moment to write down one action step that you will take in the next week. And it could be two. Like we said earlier, please create your action steps based on where you fall with your situation, what's going on in your work life, new leader, et cetera, and where you feel like you need to focus. And remember that it takes 90 days to develop a new habit typically. So this is not an overnight thing, it's baby steps. I would recommend picking one thing that you're like, okay, let me do this one thing so that you can really focus on it over the next like 3 weeks, for example. And maybe you put a calendar reminder on your calendar to remind you, okay, let me check in on this, and or it's a post-it note or whatever, and then pick up some of these other tips and tools that we've given that you can pick up over time too. All right, so what questions do we have? Does anyone have questions they want to share or ask? And also, I would love it if people have any resources or want to share any insights, that kind of the biggest insight that they've gotten from today too. I'd love to hear that as well. Oh yeah, and now I can see everyone. Okay, good, just in case. Thanks for fixing that. We were talking earlier about how Zoom updates things in a good way, but sometimes we don't know what's happening and how we need to adjust. Okay, so one question, this is perfect, thanks for asking. What goals do you suggest I set for the agreement that you mentioned? So if we think about this for a minute, in terms of designing the relationship, remember that piece at the very beginning. What I would say is, number one, like think about what your goal is overall with this person. Do you need to understand where they're coming from a little bit more because you feel like you don't know each other that well, you don't understand their strengths, et cetera, et cetera. And because of that, what you may do is say, okay, well, I'd like to go to lunch with them like once a month or once every other month or something like that. So one of our managers that we work with, he has three staff, and decided, okay, they've been here for about 6 months to a year. He decided that he was going to go to lunch with them at least once a month. And what's been so effective about that is, like, he didn't sit down and say with them, we're going to talk about these things during that time. But this is part of how he can implement the things we're talking about. He can ask them those questions. He can get to know them in a different way in a non-professional setting. So some of those goals are going to be about what you want to achieve or have be different with this relationship. And I would talk openly about things with that person, how often you're going to meet, what's the best way to meet with them, what's the best way to provide them with feedback. And with these conflict situations, like we've been talking about, and we've got two other things that came through, which is great, is if you have an agreement up front when you're not in conflict about how you deal with that and what's the best way to handle it. So, for example, if you have an issue that you need to talk about with me, if you don't mind writing it down for me in a quick email, like me personally, I'm more introverted than extroverted. I do better if I can read something, sit with it overnight, and then talk about it. So, having those types of agreements, either in advance or starting it right now, can help. We've got one person in the chat that's talking about action plan at work in a sticky situation. Tell her in advance, I need to talk about something touchy and ask permission, and then ask questions. Love it, Julie. That's awesome. We've got another question. Which strengths finder do you suggest? I'm considering having our employees do an assessment so that we can better leverage the sign model and ensure we are allowing them to operate from their strengths. We have found this to be a fantastic tool, Virginia, to do this. So I love that you're considering it. One of the cool things we found when people do something like this with their teams is then they all have a common language to use to talk to each other. So, for example, one person might say to another person, oh, you're using your woo strength right now. I think we need to do this other thing or whatever. It brings people together in a really good way, and it enables them to be a little bit more direct with each other too. The one that I suggest, and let me just put this to everyone. I think the website is strengthsfinder.com. They may have changed it. That's the problem. But the Strengths Finder, the top 5 strengths report, which is the less expensive one, I think it's plenty, because getting like your top 30 strengths, for me, I find that can be kind of overwhelming. So if you do that one, and there may be actually one to check out there, Virginia, and if not, it's on their website somewhere. What's cool about the Strengths Finder is they'll give each person their strengths, but then you can also get like a layout of what your team's, all of their strengths look like and how they fall into 4 categories. Like, for example, all of my team has strengths that fall into relationship. All of my team falls into a category called analytical. I can't remember what the categories are called, but if you can leverage that as well, and again, you might have to chat with them a little bit to find out, or maybe it's downloadable on their site after you purchase these. But I find that's cool. So it's not just about each person's top 5 strengths, but then you've got a picture of, okay, my team, we're strong in 2 categories because everybody, let's say, falls in there, but we need to learn how to do these other 2 categories a little bit more. It gives you a big picture of what your team is like. And when we do workshops like this, that's also what we're focusing on with people, is what is their team like and what do they need to do as a result to leverage each person more effectively. That was a great question. Thanks. Okay, some other questions that were captured at registration. The day-to-day may be, and I'm just going to read these out, see what it is. The day-to-day may be daunting when learning to master a habit that takes time. I totally get it. How do you stay motivated? I think taking it in baby steps, not assuming that everything's going to be perfect out of the box, including you. And if you can, for example, write down and acknowledge either every single day or every single week is probably more realistic. Put on your calendar, what was better this week as a result of my leadership? And you see and pay attention to those moments in time when things were better, when you saw someone light up, when you saw them feel more understood or heard or whatever it is. That's what's going to help you stay motivated. So I would do something weekly like that. Second one, are the techniques and skills to be used by coaches any different if it's to be used for different ages? I don't think so. Now, what I would say is if you are younger, speaking to an older like employee, let's say, who's been there a longer time, it may come across as a little sassy to be like, well, what's a different way you could look at this, right? So I do think I'm kind of backtracking a little bit as I think about this out loud. I do think there can be some differences if there is an age gap or experience difference. I think you can still ask the question, but you may want to like couch your question first a little bit more and say, can I ask you kind of a bold question? Is that okay? And beyond that, though, to me, it's the same. Another question, how do you think the requirements of leadership are changing in the fourth industrial revolution? I love this fourth industrial revolution. I think that's so, I don't know, I haven't heard that before. I think that's great. I think that it goes back a little bit to what we said earlier about how people want to feel more engaged in their work. I think people are a little bit nervous about technology and AI and how that's going to change or maybe impact their career. So, as leaders, being empathetic to that and maybe trying to help walk them through, like, here are some tools and techniques we can use leveraging technology and AI that can help enhance what we do. They're not going to take our jobs, or this is how it's going to impact things. So, just being mindful of that, I think, as leaders, is going to be really, really important because it is going to change how people do their work and trying to help shepherd people through that a little bit more and not just letting them figure it out on their own. Do I have tips on navigating through a leadership change when some of a colleague's prior expectations are no longer valid? Ooh, that's a tough one. I totally get that. I would show understanding and empathy that I get that this is frustrating. This sometimes happens with a change in leadership. If I could do things differently, I would, something like that to at least show the understanding and acknowledge it and say, I'm going to do my best to try to work through as much as we can in the right way. It could be a chance for you to say, are there, compromises or alternatives that if it's not the exact thing that was promised before, what else would you like to see? Or is there something sort of in between? So maybe gathering some of that feedback and thoughts could give you some ideas about what to do. And then after you demonstrate that empathy and understanding, though, show them and by your actions, not just by words, how whatever it is that is changing is, going to be an improvement in some way, shape, or form, or maybe it's different, or this is how, like, provide that context to why things are happening as much as you possibly can. Okay. And then that's the thing, right? There could be another change in leadership, and those other things maybe that you've promised won't get held on to. So you can't sit there and promise that, okay, this is how it's going to be for the next 10 years, but try to go through those steps with people at least a little bit to get them on board and get their buy-in a little bit more too. And go back to those four needs of followers. They don't have a sense of stability right now. So how in other ways could you try to provide that stability? Is it that you let them know your door is always open, that you're always open to hearing their ideas, and you'll do as much as possible to implement what makes sense, whatever it is? And then a final question from the ones garnered from before, best practices to mentor a colleague. Well, first of all, I like this question. I think that, first of all, you want to make sure the colleague wants to be mentored or is at least open to it. So I don't know if you've had a formal conversation with them or not, but if they've asked you to, I mean, that's great. I would make sure that your boundaries are clear, that you're not sitting there saying, since they're at your same level, that you might have expertise in certain things that they don't, and you may or may not. But set up some boundaries and kind of guidelines about what they're expecting from the relationship. Are they expecting you to tell them what to do all the time? Because that would be a little bit intimidating. What their goal is from it, what they really want from you. Get all of those questions answered so that you can understand like what's going on there. And then I would just make sure that the boundaries are clear too. Like right now, I have my mentor hat on. Is it okay if we talk in that way? And at other times at work, for example, I've got my coworker hat on. So I would actually use that a little bit to help understand when you're in either mode, because there could be differences between those modes, and there usually are. All right. So we've got, as we wait for any other questions to come through here, please take a look at the chat if you would, because we do have a survey and we love getting feedback from people on our programs. We love getting ideas about future topics as well. And then in the chat also is information about our upcoming boot camp for Vanderbilt alumni. It's fantastic. It's one that I'm leading, obviously, which is why we're talking about it. But the boot, and there's also, I should say both. There's also other really great programs too. But our job search boot camp is coming up at the end of May. And it's really fantastic because if you know anyone who is going to be searching for a new job, is in the process right now, please feel free to share that information with them, because we welcome Vandy friends, including alumni, students, et cetera, to attend those boot camps. And we give you a lot of really great advice about how to make your job search as effective as it possibly can, because there's a lot of other things that go on with job searching these days, which can be a little bit overwhelming for people. All right, so Kate or Kelsey, do you want to say anything before we close out for today? And if other questions do come through, we've got to thank you. You're so welcome. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Hallie, thank you so much. This was so informative, and thank you everyone for your questions. And for attending today. Don't forget to complete that survey Hallie was talking about that's in the chat now, and we look forward to seeing you in future webinars. Have a great day.
Sounds good. Bye.